Carlos Aguilar, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Well, when you first saw Black Panther Wakanda Forever and you saw the character that is played by Tenoch Huerta, what was your reaction?
I mean, it was, very interesting because I had heard that he had been cast, a few months ago. But I, wasn't aware of sort of like how meaningful his presence and his character's, role in the film would be. And the fact that they did so much research and sort of like intentionally try to include and make the character indigenous and sort of like really delve into that aspect of his history. Yeah, I thought that it was really important and impressive.
I think that when I first watched this movie, I saw him. I say, yeah, this guy's a kind of a villain type character, but yet he wasn't because he had this pride. He had this underwater world as Namor. And it actually wasn't until I read your article in the New York Times about him uh, and really what he means when it comes to the issue of casting of brown and black people and also colorism, and particularly just it's an issue that I've been wanting us to cover for quite a while because I'm a dark skinned guy and have always felt that that was an issue, but just his pride about himself, and that seems to be something that really is standing out about him, and he's about it as well.
Right. I mean, yeah, he's used his platform for, many years. I feel like this is sort of like his breakthrough internationally, but of course he's had a pretty long career in Mexican films, and over the last few years he's sort of become a force in Mexico, to talk about the racism in the country, and the colorism as you mentioned, and sort of like trying to fight against those um, you know stereotypes that the media in Mexico portrays. And I think it's very interesting because I feel like when you talk about racism, people think often about the United States, and it's
Right.
often not seen. And, perhaps Americans are not as knowledgeable or aware of how big, the issue is across Latin America. Because, in everyone's family, there's someone that's, that looks like me, that's very, white, light skin, and there's people that look like Tenoch, and there's people that look somewhere in the middle, but we're always sort of like, something that he said in the interview that didn't make it to the final thing was that he told me that didn't make it to the final piece. He was quoting someone else, another writer in Mexico, who's also talking about these issues and how in Mexico families are usually, or Mexican families or Latin American families are often trying to um, search or cling to their white ancestors. Everyone always talking about their Spanish grandfather or their French, great grandmother, or their Italian, great great grandpa, but they never feel that pride for their indigenous ancestors. And so I felt that that's 100% true. We really have a lot of work to do in Latin America and in Mexican communities or Latino communities in the United States as well, to sort of like come to terms with the racism that's always been, kind of ingrained in us from, colonialism of all the ills of what's our history and our past.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
From your article, there was a lot of eye-opening things for me about in the entertainment business in Mexico and how colorism plays a part of that. Do you see that same thing going on here in the U.S.? I mean, let's face it, colorism is a thing in every culture. It doesn't matter where you're from. I mean, the bad guys are always portrayed way darker. The heroes are portrayed lighter skinned. I mean, it's just a natural thing. But do you see that being better in the US or different?
I mean, I think it's, the same in
Yeah.
terms of how negative it is. But particularly, I feel like those, thinking about the Latino community, I feel like those patterns are replicated, because the media in Mexico looks the same as the Latino media in the US. Univision or Telemundo are, cut from the same cloth. So the people that they that they have on screen are usually, lighter skin, blue-eyed or, blonde or, sort of like, people that don't look like the Notch. And so I feel like we've basically imported that or replicated that, and it's all part of the same thing. So I don't think the US is any better in those things. I just feel like for Americans, it might be surprising, or they might not know that this issue is also very big in Latin America, because the way that people are racialized in the US is sort of different than it works in Latin America. And in Latin America, the assumption is that we're all the same or mixed or whatnot, but the reality is that there's incredible racism and colorism based on this sort of detachment or trying to negate our indigenous sort of background.
That's something that I've been kind of yelling about for years. I think Matt has heard me talk about this and my other friends, and particularly in watching Spanish language television. The newscasters or the entertainment shows, the novelas, I don't see people that look like me or the color of my skin very often in a lead role. In fact, I don't see it I don't see it at all. And it just drives me crazy. So in Mexico, is there, with obviously Tenoch is making this a real big issue. He speaks out about it and gets his own blowback about it. But is there any kind of movement to change this?
I mean, of course, I just wanted to say that I'm speaking, through what I know. I'm clearly not the voice, perhaps not the most appropriate voice to speak on it, because although I've experienced my own sort of set of like circumstances, clearly, I cannot fully understand what darker skinned Mexicans experience. But I will say that from what I read and I've heard is that Tenoch and many other actors have started sort of having panels and conversations. There was an initiative called Poder Prieto that he and other actors were part of, to sort of like speak about these issues, particularly
which is power to the brown,
like brown
power,
like brown power. Yeah,
yeah.
And Tenoch also
yeah,
just
I like that. I like that.
yeah, as I mentioned in the article, he also just released a book called Orgullo Prieto, which is sort of like brown pride. And so he's definitely at the forefront of that. And as you might remember, just even very recently, the same thing happened. I think the conversation really started sort of to become more sort of coming to the mainstream when Yalitza Aparicio, the actress nominated for Roma, for an Oscar, receive a lot of like racism and hatred based on her indigenous background, the color of her skin. And so I feel like that sort of brought it, to the foreground. And since then, many more voices have been sort of joining in discussing these issues about, the type of roles that they get, and, which are often, relegated to, housekeepers or, criminals or whatnot. And so, yeah, I feel like there's definitely a conversation that is happening, but of course, there's also a lot of pushback. There's also a lot of like people that are not happy and that engage in a very sort of toxic way when it comes to these issues. That as Tenoch said in the interview as well, the more that people react that way, the more sort of it proves the point that this is a problem.
Yeah, sounds just like America, unfortunately.
Right.
So were you shocked by the portray? I mean, how they portrayed his character in the movie? I mean, were you prepared for the way he was presented?
I mean, I think it's an interesting and complicated way of presenting it, right? Because he's essentially, quote unquote, the villain, but at the same time, the reasoning behind the things that he does, whether anyone agrees with the violence that he engages in, are to sort of defend his people and sort of like keep away the colonizers, essentially, and sort of maintain their language and their civilization. And so I think that it's interesting that he's not a black and white character, like an easily define villain or hero. Like there's complicated feelings that go within him, and I found that interesting. And at the end, well, I won't get into the spoilers, but I think that they solve it in an interesting manner, sort of the resolution of that conflict.
Right. It does make you think at the end there. His character is called Namor, which actually is a combination. Can you explain that of how he got that
Yeah,
name?
from what I understand that I from what I understood, I don't know if this, like, because the character originally wasn't meant to be, Mayan, like in the original comics.
Right.
So I feel like the name, the explanation to the name sort of like came as part of like their push to make it, an indigenous character from Latin America. So Namor, in the explanation that we're given in the film, is that, the Spaniards, the colonizers, when they came into contact with this godlike, being that has like
Right.
wings on his feet and flies, they thought of him as sort of like a demonic presence or something, evil, and they call them sin amor, so without love. And so Namor comes from, the sin amor kind of wordplay there. But yeah, I think that this came as part of like an explanation for this interpretation of the character that wasn't precisely connected to the original comic book. So I thought that was very clever and interesting that they
Right.
found a way
Yeah.
to.
Why
Yeah.
why do you think Marvel cast the role like this? I mean, what was because everything is purposeful in a movie, right?
Right.
What do you think they were trying to say?
I mean, I think that the original Black Panther movie was already a movie about, indigenous Black people in Africa who had not been colonized, who had retained their civilization. And so my assumption, is that perhaps they wanted to expand that similarly now in another region, and perhaps even make a connection or sort of like a kinship between, two groups of people that, want to retain who they are and fend off, people that want to exploit them and, take their resources. Yeah.
He he had to jump through a bunch of hoops to play this character. Can you talk a bit about that?
Well, yeah, I think he's a great actor, but at the same time, what the role required, right? I think he's mentioned that he didn't know how to swim before taking it.
That's what his character does. Yeah.
Right. And also, English is not his first language, and neither is the Maya Yucatec, the specific Maya language that he had to, at least learn the dialogue in, to portray this character. So he was like acting in two languages that are not his first language, and the swimming part. And also, I'm assuming that is, coming from working in sort of like smaller independent, Mexican films, and maybe a couple American, bigger budget movies, it's still not the sort of behemoth that a Marvel movie is, right? And so in terms of the logistics and the green screens and the visual effects and the prosthetics, he was also wearing like prosthetic, ears and stuff. So
Right.
yeah, it's and he still manages to give a very powerful performance, through all of these things that he had to do for the role.
Yeah.
Do you think this is going to be sort of an emphasis going forward in the entertainment industry and in general, with the success of his role, that more people are going to look for that? Because demographically, the movie was designed to appeal to U.S. audiences, American audiences, and really engage the Black audience. And we all know that the Blacks have way more clout in the entertainment world. And so do you think this will help the standing of Latinos in movies and television?
I feel like the Black community have earned, those spaces for themselves, and have,
Definitely.
for many, many decades sort of also experienced, oppression when it comes to the entertainment industry or not. So I wouldn't like to sort of like compare or see who's, more oppressed there, but I will, I hope that this doesn't only mean that that there's more Latino representation, but just in general, and I feel like the Marvel movies, as much as they're made here and they're made in English, they become sort of a global brand. They now have to, appeal to global audiences, and so I think that it's very, powerful when they choose to focus on, on having indigenous characters and having like an indigenous language portrayed in a movie that's going to reach so many screens, and also to give Tenoch a platform to to share his views and sort of to like spread this message beyond the borders of Mexico, Latin America, because as you mentioned, like every culture has their own issues, and sadly colorism or racism are things that have been implanted in many regions through the process of colonizations and whatnot. So I hope that this means that they're gonna try to include more people, and if that means that hopefully more dark skin or Latin Americans or indigenous Latin Americans or indigenous people from other people get to be in the spotlight. I think that that's pretty great.
Well, in the entertainment world, speaks one language, money. And if he, and
Right. I mean,
it
it's
seems to be,
undeniable, right? When the
Right.
success of a movie like that, I think he also mentions that in the article that I did of him, that the success of the movie will speak for itself and sort of like mitigate the doubts that anyone can have about whether these movies with people like Tenoch or with a black cast can succeed. And of course the answer has been proven is that yes, that audiences wants to see, they want to see this, and so yeah, I think the
well,
success of
and
it will help.
it's interesting too that usually in big blockbuster movies, there's always a story that emerges, but the fact that the story is about him and none of the other cast members is really important.
I mean, I think that mostly, I think that has to do with the fact that a lot of the other cast members, were in the first movie, and he's sort of like
Right.
the new big cast member.
And he's sort of the
Of course,
eye candy of the movie, if you think about it. Yeah. Yeah, good.
yeah. I mean, so I feel like it has more to do with that. But yeah, clearly there have been a lot of pieces written about, the significance of, the tribute to, Chadwick Boseman and, Angela Bassett, coming into sort of like a bigger role in this film now that, that Boseman's character is no longer part of it, for obvious reasons, right? For his, untimely departure. And so yeah, I mean, I feel like he is sort of like the biggest new cast member, and so I feel like a lot of the stories have focused on him. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
So,
it's interesting because the experience of Crazy Rich Asians, right? I mean,
Mhm.
that movie had a lot of issues, especially the whole deal of Asian privilege and that sort of thing. But it did open the door. I mean, you saw a lot more inclusion because Hollywood realized it could be big at the box office.
Right. And with that film, and with any sort of representation of Latinos in Hollywood, I think the important thing is that Hollywood needs to understand that neither community is a monolith. That within the
Mm-hmm.
right.
Latino community there are, again, people that look like me, people that look like the Notch, people that look, who are Afro Latinos, people who come from, who have roots in Colombia, Brazil, Argentina, Chile. So we're like the same with the Asian community, and it's there's many countries, many languages, and sort of to try to reduce them to one single thing, it's the problem. So I think the only solution is for them to be more movies that can represent a wide variety of people within the same community. Like not one single movie can represent all Latinos or all Asian people, so yeah, I feel like in this moment in time with Wakanda Forever, the spotlight is on dark skinned Mexicans or indigenous people or anyone that identifies with that sort of specific struggle and depiction. And so hopefully in the future we get another movie that's perhaps focused on Afro Brazilians or Afro Dominicans or Guatemalans, Central Americans. So yeah, I think that's the real solution, to have multiple times of being in the front and center of any film, so that not one single film has the task of representing everyone.
Yeah. Can we talk a little bit about you and your background? You grew up in Mexico. Tell us a bit about your growing up and coming to the States and becoming a film critic.
Yeah, I mean, I grew up in Mexico City. I lived there until I was about 13, and then I, um, you know, financial difficulties, and my family sort of like pushed for me to come to the US. And I was sort of raised by my aunt here. I am a DACA recipient, which means that you're an undocumented person who came here as a minor, and so that has a unique set of challenges in terms of like not being able to access resources for higher education, which is one of the reasons why I couldn't attend a 4-year college and went to community college. And I've always been a big passionate about film. In high school and in community college I made little short films here and there. And so when I realized that perhaps the 4-year college in film production was not feasible because it's so expensive to go to film school, and being undocumented and working at a fast food place. I worked at a fast food place for many years to put myself to college. So that pathway wasn't sort of realistic. So when DACA happened, which is this program, like I said, that allows undocumented people that came here as minors to have a work permit and to have a little bit of a more stable sort of life here. When that happened, I was able to start, making inways and trying to, work somehow in the film industry, and started writing for a personal blog, and, then reach out to some outlets and started writing for them. And sort of, it's grown from that. It's been now about 9 years since I started writing. And so it's been, sort of like a big journey for me to come from that to writing for some of the cool places that I've gotten to write for, like the New York Times or the LA Times.
You were a fellow with a Roger Ebert Fellowship.
Yeah, that was one of the sort of like big turning points for me. It was a fellowship that the Sundance Institute and IndieWire, a website that covers a lot of film and entertainment, they put together to have 6 young critics. This was in 2014, 8 years ago. And so you submit an application, and whoever got selected, the 6 selected, they will take us to Sundance. So I was one of the ones that were chosen, and they took us to Sundance. They pay our way to go to the Sundance Film Festival, which is arguably so the best, and the not the best, but the most important or recognized film festival in the US, for world premieres. And yeah, that was my first experience at a major film festival, writing reviews and interviewing talent from there. So that was a big sort of like turning point for me, that to experience that in a more professional way, as opposed to just writing reviews or things for my personal blog or whatnot. So that was kind of like a big eye opener for me.
So what's it like being a big time film critic? I mean, people think like, well, what a great job, watching movies and writing about them for a living. What's it like?
I mean, I wouldn't say big time, but I'm a freelancer, which means that it's you always have to sort of be on the hustle to get assignments or pitch story ideas to the outlets, like sort of to convince them to let you write about something. And with reviews, like people, some of the outlets that I write for, they assign me whatever they need a review for, and so you end up getting things that you really like and things that you don't like as much. I mean, I can't complain in the sense that doing this for a living is very rewarding and is very exciting job. It doesn't pay as much as people will think. It's not it's sort of like an industry that is in flux. The publishing, I mean, the media industry in terms of film and entertainment coverage.
Yeah, no doubt.
Very few full-time positions, so most of us that write about movies are freelancers, sort of going gig by gig, and so there's not that much of a stable income or benefits, and it's a hustle. I'm very sort of grateful and lucky that I've gotten to a point where I can make a sustainable living out of writing. But it's definitely not an easy way. For many, for the first few years that I was doing this, I had other jobs that that I had to do in order to be able to do this as a sort of like a side gig. And I think a lot of people that want to write or that are writing about movies or writing reviews have to do that. They have to have a day job and write about movies at night. Go watch movies at night and write about them. Because they're passionate about this. Like I don't think no one's making the big bucks writing about movies unless you're sort of like the staff critic for like a major publication, perhaps. But those jobs are like very few and far between. So yeah, I mean, I don't think it's as glamorous as people think, but it's definitely a cool gig.
Why are you passionate about this?
I mean, I've always liked writing and reading, and I've always liked, film, movies in general. And so it just felt like a way for me to still, be engaged in film and in movies and, do something that I've always liked, which is writing, So it just felt like a good combination of those two things, the putting words to the page and then, doing so about movies. Yeah, I think my mom was always a big movie watcher growing up. We couldn't afford any vacations or even we didn't even have like a video game console because it was just me and my brother and those things are expensive in Latin America at least.
Yeah.
And so the movies were like the most affordable thing that we could do for like, for birthdays or for like a special occasion or getting good grades. It was going to the movies. So I feel like I always associated the movies with like a good time or with like a sort of like a reward, like like a special thing. So we will go to the movies, for all those occasions, and I think I grew, to really, really love it. Yeah.
This article that you wrote for the New York Times about Tenoch Huerta, was that your first piece for them?
No, I've been writing for them for a couple years now. 2 years, yeah. And so it wasn't the first, but it was definitely one that I'm very proud of because you like I said for a lot of these things you have to go to the outlet and be like I want to write this piece and sort of like convince them or show them why it's important and relevant for them to give you the platform, the assignment to write about this. So I was very happy that they responded to my pitch, to me sort of like saying that this was an important moment and that Tenoch was an important figure for them to cover. So I was very happy about that. And then, they also published it in Spanish, which is always, really great because, I have a lot of family members that don't speak English, including my mom and other people that and so they can, once in a while read something that I publish, when it's in Spanish. So yeah, it wasn't the first, but it was definitely an important one for me.
Did you have to sell them on this very hard?
I mean, I feel like they were definitely gonna cover, this movie, but he's not that well known in the US yet. And so me, because I watch a lot of like Mexican, Latin American films, I've known his work for a long time. So it was more sort of like making a case for, beyond, that there was more to him than just this role, that he's also an activist, that he's also outspoken about racism. And so it was more about like using this moment, this sort of like very bright spotlight that he has on him right now because of the Marvel movie to also talk about the other things that he encompasses. And so it was just kind of like making a case and bringing, the other knowledge that I had on him and his career to the table for them to see.
Well, I'm glad you did because I think this is such an important topic, and particularly these days and times, especially because
I mean, just for people to be seen is huge, right?
Yeah, right.
I mean, in the media. So okay, so I gotta ask, what's your favorite film as a film critic? What's a film that people should watch?
From this year and just in general?
Just in general, your favorite.
I don't know. I think I always, when people ask me this, I think my favorite, I always say that it's the French film Amélie, which is now it's sort of like cliche now, but it was a movie that I watched when I was very young, and it was sort of like the first movie that, because when you're a kid, you mostly watch animated films or movies that are, not that animation is only for children, but you tend to watch a lot of Disney films or movies that are made for kids. And so when I watched Amelie, was sort of like the first movie that sort of like let me see that there was a different world of movies beyond the things that I was watching, sort of the American Disney stuff, which I still love, but that one was sort of like a coming of age for me in terms of like seeing movies beyond that. But from this year, I think a movie that I would recommend people to watch is a movie called After Sun. which is a movie about from Scotland by this young director, and it's a movie about her reconnecting with her father. Sort of like looking back at her memories with her father, which I think is really beautifully done.
So,
Go ahead. Oh, so what's the movie this holiday season that people should watch? Because this is when they release blockbusters.
Yeah, I mean, Pinocchio, I think the Guillermo del Toro animated movie Pinocchio, I think I think it's not only a great, sort of like holiday season movie, but just like a wonderful, incredible movie. He's of course, a very talented, incredible director, and I think this one is one of his best. And it's a story that, we've seen many times, but it's told in a unique way that sort of like makes it refreshing and unique and sort of unlike any other version of Pinocchio that we've seen before.
so another Wakanda movie down the line. Do you see that?
Probably. I mean, and it seems, without spoiling it, judging by the ending, that
Right.
probably we haven't seen the last of Namor. And so, if that means, that, the Notch and the other Mexican actors that are part of this movie come back, I think that's great.
Yeah,
Right.
well, even Thanos got a sequel, right?
Carlos, so how can people find your work and read your reviews? Can you tell us?
Yeah, I mean, I'm on Twitter for as long as Twitter
Yeah, exactly.
is around. I'm at Carlos_film. I'm also on Instagram where I also share my stuff at Carlos Film, just no spaces, Carlos Film. And yeah, and I write reviews often for The Wrap and the LA Times, and articles for the New York Times or IndieWire or RogerEvert.com, all over the place. But I try to always share on Twitter and on Instagram whatever I'm doing.
So, did you have to jump through a lot of hoops to get a hold of Tenoch for an interview?
I mean, oftentimes when you're dealing with the studio machine, you have to go through a lot of reps. I wouldn't
Right.
say it was difficult, but you have to go through the right channels for these things sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you for doing this piece, and thank you for all the background. And it's an excellent article that you wrote, and I think an
Thank you.
important one too, to let people know not only about the actor but also about what he represents,
Yeah.
so that Americans can really understand a bit more about all this, and so people in general can also understand some of the issues
the
behind
issues of colorism is huge,
Yeah.
and white people should know that, they're not the only ones that are despicable in the
it.
sense of that. I mean, racism is a worldwide phenomenon. I mean,
Yeah.
it just is. I mean, I don't know if that's how we're wired, but that's what it is. And colorism is a huge, huge part of that.
Yeah, it's a sad thing. All right. Well, Carlos, thank you so much for taking the time to join us, and I look forward to reading more of your work ahead. And let's stay in touch. We'd love to have you back on again.
Absolutely. Thank you for the invite, guys.